Welcome back for part 2 on the Laguna JX8 ShearTech 2 jointer. I said I would release this several weeks ago, but I haven't been able to because the machine would not hold its adjustment. I reached out to Laguna about a month ago. They finally got back to me yesterday, and I'm going to go through some of the tips that I was given on the phone from Joe at Laguna. Joe gave me some good tips that I really wasn't thinking about when I was setting this up the last several times. So let's get right into it so we can get this machine up and running because I've got sawdust and projects to make. Step number 1 is getting a solid foundation on the machine. So you need to engage the wheel locks on the infeed side, and they're just simply a bolt that screws into the wheel so that the wheel can't turn. The outfeed side has leveling feet, much like a washing machine, so you want to make sure that you get the machine nice and solid so that when you put weight on this corner or the other, that you don't get any racking of this cabinet. You don't want it to twist and turn at all because it's going to make the infeed and outfeed tables want to twist and turn also. Spend some time doing it. It might take you 10 or even 30 minutes to get the base nice and solid, but once you do, you'll know you've got it and you're starting from the ground up literally. The next thing you're going to want to do is make sure that a lot of the foundational parts on the machine are tight. So that's going to include things like this little grub screw, this cap screw, and there's a set of those on both ends. You're going to want to do the same at the cutter head end of the table. And in order to access these on the other end of the outfeed table, you may have to take that steel plate off. Taking the steel plate off is pretty easy just by taking off these two cap screws, but then that's going to allow you to get in behind it where the grub screw and the other cap screw is to tighten the table to the actual parallelogram mechanism. Also make sure that the cap screw on each end of this shaft are nice and tight. So it's right here on the top, and it's also located on the other end by the cutter head end anyways right here. And there's also a couple of screws that were not tight right here, and this just holds the adjustment bracket for the height of the outfeed table. Similarly, on the infeed table, everything needs to be done here also, just like you did on the outfeed end. So tighten the cap screws, get in behind, tighten the grub screws, the cap screws. You might need to take that plate off again. I needed to, my Allen keys couldn't get quite in there properly. And the same on this end. Tighten up all of these cap screws. Make sure that they're just not going to allow any kind of vibration or motion while the machine is in operation. And you need to do that on all four corners of the infeed as well as all four corners of the outfeed table. Next, you need to get that outfeed table lined up with the cutter head. And to do that, you need to make sure that it's parallel this way. And you also need to make sure that the surface of the outfeed table is nice and tangent to top dead center on the cutter head at 12 o'clock. We're going to do that next. It takes a bit of time, but it's very straightforward. Get the outfeed table so that it's actually going to be able to move. And you need to loosen two screws. One will be this small cap screw right here, and you access it from the back. And that actually is just to tighten the stop. This is that half moon piece of metal that is referred to in the instruction book. And you also need to loosen this one off because this one is the one that allows the table to actually move up and down so that you can set it tangent to top dead center. You want to remove these grub screws. They hold the adjustment of the table so that it can't move. And Joe, when I was talking to him from Laguna, said back them out all the way because you want to remove them and look at the bottom of them, because he wondered if the problem I was having with the adjustment not being held is if the bottom surface of it was rounded in some way. Now it is coned because that's the way the little grub screw is made, but he suggested taking a file to it to make it rough so that it was nice and flat and rough so that it grabs that eccentric cam much better so that it doesn't want to slide or loosen or get jarred when the machine's on and vibrating. So I'm going to take out all of these and we're going to file them down a little bit to make the ends rougher and make sure they're flat. So I've removed all the grub screws and I've discovered something that I didn't really expect. All of them are not the same. Some of them are ground flat on the bottom like this one. Other ones have a cone on them. So this one's flat, as is this one and this back left one. These are the exact positions that they came out of the machine. So imagine this side being the infeed side and the outfeed side. The cutter head is represented by that Allen key. I was always having my outfeed table go low or high at the two cams closest to where the cutter head is. And those are the two screws that have the cones on them rather than the flat corners. So I'm going to grind them all off flat and go and replace them. I didn't film grinding off these grub screws at all. I used the side of the grinding wheel on a bench grinder rather than the front surface because it would have created a dished or a concaved surface. The good thing about that is, according to Joe, is you get a nice rough surface, so it should grab that eccentric cam so that it holds and doesn't loosen off. With the infeed table set lower than the cutter head, the next thing you're going to want to do is get the outfeed table just so that it kisses the cutter head. So you've got this loosened off here, and just get it so it kisses the cutter head at top dead center there. I think that's got it. You're also going to want to make sure when you start to adjust these cams that you have these cap screws in the center of the cams just loosened off ever so slightly so that you don't create a large amount of friction when you start moving these cams up and down. So just back them off on all four corners of both tables. I just want to show you what happens when you rotate one of these eccentric cams. Okay, I've just got the dial indicator on here so you can actually see how much travel you get. Okay, so as you start to turn this, you know, I had it zeroed out. It went over to about 23 thousandths, and in the other direction, it looks like it's going to get out to probably around 20 or so. So I'm pretty close to the middle of the travel of this particular cam, okay? But I do know that it's very close where it was at the 0 point. But in any event, we're gonna work away at this a little bit and start to set everything up. Now, I hope you can see my setup here somewhat. So I've got a straight edge. I've got it marked off with a piece of tape at the, I guess it's at the 75 centimeter position. It's just a little bit beyond the midpoint of the actual straight edge so that it won't fall over onto the infeed side at all, just so the weight keeps the straight edge on the outfeed. Now, when you center that straight edge over one of the segments on the cutter head and spin it, it's dragging about 6.5 millimeters. And I'm trying to put my fingers on both sides of that segment and both sides of the ruler or the straight edge so that I can make sure that it's centered on the actual cutter. And here we're only going to drag about 5 millimeters. So that means this corner is a little bit higher because it's not dragging as far. So we do want to bring the other one a little bit higher as well so that it can match up. And we only want this to drag just a couple millimeters, just so that it's barely dragging whatsoever. So let's set this other side up. I'm going to use the exact same segment or the same cutter every time I do this. And let's move that cam on the back side a little bit. Now, you don't need to use a dial indicator, but it can help you know if you're going up or down. So if you're raising the table, the dial indicator is going to be going clockwise, okay? And I do need to raise that particular corner, so let's get it to go a little more clockwise. This particular cam is not easy to get at. Okay, now I moved that a little bit. Okay, I'm moving about 2 millimeters there. And let's bring it to the other side and see if we can get it to move by about 2 millimeters also. Now this is going to be a bit of a gross adjustment to begin with here, because once these are set, it's going to be somewhat dependent upon how twisted or level the rest of the table is as we start to change it. Okay, that's going too far. So let's also raise this up. Okay, and that's pretty close to 2 millimeters there also. What you're going to do next is you're going to use a feeler gauge and you're going to try to get under this straight edge to know if the table is concave or convex. And you're going to do this with the straight edge across the back, the front, and on both diagonals. So let's just see how we're doing here. So I'm using a 2,000th feeler, and I cannot get it in anywhere along that. And you want to make sure that you're not riding on one of the cutter head segments holding up your straight edge. Okay, let's see where we are on this front side here. Yeah, I can't get this in anywhere along there either. Let's see what the diagonals are like. Because I've set the machine up a few times, I almost expect that I'm going to be pretty close to where I need to be right at the beginning of this, and I'm not going to be too far out of alignment. And actually it's looking like it's in really, really close, good alignment here. So maybe this is going to go faster for me than what I anticipated. Yeah, this table's pretty flat. Okay, so because it's so close to being adjusted after the few times I've done it, we're just going to change the height right here a little bit, because I believe this is the one that was dragging the straight edge just a little bit further. So let's see here. Yeah, we're going 2 millimeters, maybe just barely past that. Yeah, we're about 2.5 millimeters. That's going to be very, very difficult to change ever so slightly. I don't even know if I can. That back one is so hard to get at. I think I'm just barely going to change this one. That's probably too much, but it's going to change the other side as well. So I'm dragging almost 3 millimeters there, and almost 3 millimeters. That is as close as you're ever going to get. So I'm going to try and lock things in place right there. First thing you're going to do is set this little half moon stop up. So flip it down against this plate and tighten up that cap screw. I just did that a moment ago off camera, and then you're going to want to tighten this one as well so that the table can't move whatsoever. Torque it good, make sure it doesn't move. You're never going to change that outfeed table. It's going to stay in the same place forever. I'm very curious to know when I tighten that set screw if it actually influences the adjustment whatsoever. So I have thrown the dial indicator on there just to see what happens with this. So let's tighten this up a little, and hopefully it does not move, because you really don't want to lose your adjustment. So it's maybe going a little lower by about 1/1000th of an inch. And we're going to torque this down really well so it doesn't move. Yeah, and it's just changed it by about 1/1000th of an inch. So very, very little. And the other thing we're going to want to do is tighten up the center of this. And hopefully that doesn't change things either. And it's not. It's staying very, very constant there. I like that. Okay, so let's do that to the far side there of the outfeed table. Now hopefully we have the same thing happen here, where it really doesn't move when we tighten it down. Yeah, it's really not moving, so we're maybe out by 1/1000th from one side to the other. So theoretically we could raise this corner by 1/1000th and let it drop back down. When I tighten up that center cap screw, it actually ends up having the same effect on those measurements as the other one, so maybe I don't need to move anything. Let's check this again with a ruler drag. So I've got this set up right now, so we're dragging about 3+ millimeters, not quite 4. It's probably around 3.5 millimeters or so, and it's actually like that on both the back and the front side of this cutter head. So I think that's as close as I can get. In fact, I'm extremely happy with that. And let's just verify it on this side here so you can see what I've actually done. Yeah, it's so identical. Like, I'm not going to mess with that. I'm going to leave it. The first thing you're going to do is zero out a dial indicator on the outfeed table, and you're going to want to do that both on the back of the table as well as over on the front corner of the table close to the cutter head. Next, you're going to check where the infeed table is relative to the outfeed table just by putting the dial indicator on both the front corner and the back corner of that infeed table. And you're going to have to make a gross adjustment to the infeed table to get it as close to in plane with the outfeed table as you can just by eye. And then you're going to check how close you are on both the front and the back of the infeed table close to the cutter head. In my case, I was really only off about 2/1000ths from one side of the infeed table to the other. Since the dial indicator is a little bit clockwise from 0, we know that that corner is a little bit high, so I need to lower it by a couple thousandths of an inch. And the other corner of the infeed table is about a couple thousandths of an inch too low, so we just need to raise it up a tiny bit. Now that you have the left end of the infeed table at the same height as the outfeed table, you need to work on the right end of it so that you can get it coplanar to the outfeed table. What you're going to do is adjust the right cams on the infeed table so that you can't slip a 2/1000th feeler gauge underneath of the ruler at any point. So adjust the cams, keep checking with your feeler gauge until you get it all at the same height and in plane with the outfeed table. It really doesn't matter if you work on the back edge of the infeed table first or the front edge of the infeed table first, but you do need to continually check along the length of your straight edge with your feeler gauge. And the one thing that you definitely want to make sure you do is to check with your feeler gauge underneath of your straight edge on the outfeed table as well. If you have one end of the infeed table too high or too low, you may actually artificially start to put it out of plane, and you'll be able to get a feeler gauge underneath of your straight edge over on that outfeed table. So make sure to check it over in that area as well, along the front and the back of the infeed table. The last step is to check the diagonals on the infeed table, and when you set your straight edge on it, you want to make sure that it's not being held up or hung up on the fence if it's still attached, or on the area where the fence would actually attach to the jointer. Run your feeler gauge along it, and if you've done everything correct up to this point, you shouldn't be able to get a feeler gauge under that straight edge anywhere, and that infeed table should be coplanar to the outfeed table. But if it's not, you'll very easily be able to detect where you need to move a cam up or down based on where you're able to get the feeler gauge under your straight edge. Once you're sure that you have that infeed table coplanar to the outfeed table, you need to tighten down the stop that doesn't allow the infeed table to go any higher than where it is right now. So you just have to tighten down that half moon stop that's over by the depth adjustment lever. Then go ahead and tighten up all 4 grub screws on each of those eccentric bushings. Once you have all 4 of those grub screws tightened down, you want to do a final check with your straight edge across the outfeed and the infeed tables just to make sure that you haven't changed any of the settings on those 4 eccentric cams when you tighten those grub screws down. It is possible that you may have shifted one up or down slightly, and now's the time to check for it before you start using your machine. If you do find you've actually moved one of those, you can micro adjust any one of those cams on that infeed table to compensate for any changes or shifts that happened while tightening everything down. Okay, one of the final steps is getting your fence set up so it's 90 degrees to your tables. Grab yourself a 3/4 inch socket and ratchet and unlock your fence. And up underneath, right approximately here, there's a nylon nut that you want to remove. So let's get that off of there right now. There's also a large washer, so make sure you don't lose that either. Put those away somewhere safe, and let's get this fence off the jointer here. I had troubles with my fence not holding its adjustment once you started to actually edge joint some boards. So what we're going to do is we're going to tighten up these 4 pivot points. Okay, and the way you do that is you simply take this jam nut right here and you loosen it off. And what you're going to notice, I'm just going to take this off just for the sake of showing you. And we're going to take this out completely just so I can show you what's going on here. These bolts have a cone on the end of them. Hopefully you can kind of see that there. And they fit into a hole on this post. So what you want to do is make sure that you've got these tight. And you're going to want to tighten the posts on the fence right here so that you know there's no slop in those. Once you've got those retaining pins out, your fence is going to be nice and free, so you're going to have access to the jam nut on this post. So it's a 3/4 inch jam nut, and get it loosened off a little bit so you can put something through to align the hole so that it actually runs in line with the cone-shaped bolt. And once you've got it aligned up, then give it a little bit of a snug, and then do the same to the other side as well. And tighten all of these up so that you can actually get all the slop out of your fence. Now I put a few drops of 3-in-1 oil on each of the pivot points here on those little cones, just to make sure that they can rotate in there and articulate somewhat smoothly if you ever do change the setting on the fence. But do that to all 4 of these, okay, and get the slop out of them. And you can actually get it centered in the chassis pretty easily just by changing how much you tighten each side. It just slides it left and right somewhat. Good. And it still articulates just fine. And then snug up those jam nuts. Okay, let's go ahead and put that fence back on. Now I've just got that nut snugged up enough that there's no play in that washer at all, and you can still actually operate the fence nice and smoothly so that it's not gonna have any movement in it. One thing I didn't mention before is you also want to make sure you tighten this nut up so there's no play in this articulation point. And this particular Allen screw here, or Allen bolt, allows the fence to shift up and down on the left and right ends of it. So just make sure that you've got that in such a way so that it isn't actually making the fence drag on one side of your table or the other to scratch it up as you move it forwards and backwards. Okay, one thing you're going to want to pay attention to when you are setting up your fence is that you don't tighten those 2 posts too much. If you do, it's going to take these contact mounting posts and bring them together, making your fence actually convex in nature when you're running a board across it. So it'll take your fence and it'll bow it like this. Okay, so just snug it up. Put a straight edge on here to make sure that it's nice and straight, and that way you'll know that you haven't over tightened those post pegs. Okay, here's the procedure that I have had good luck with to adjust the fence to 90 degrees with reliability. So loosen off your jam nut, back off this one cap screw, have your fence lock loose, and you're going to actually have this one unlocked that moves the fence forwards and backwards for now. Get your fence wherever you want it to go, okay? I'm gonna just set mine to the back of the jointer, as far back to allow me to face joint as wide of a board as possible. You're gonna lock this in, okay? Now it can't move forwards and backwards on this knob at all, and it can't rock side to side or do anything funny. Okay, get your square on the outfeed table against the fence, and make sure that that nut is right up against this 90-degree stop. So get it right up against it, and leave yourself with a little bit of space at the top of the square. What you're going to do is tighten the cap screw to close the gap on the square. Once you've got that gap closed, you're going to gently tighten the actual mechanism that holds everything tight, which is this one. So just tighten this one a little bit. Okay, check and make sure you're still square, which I am. Now you're going to actually tighten the jam nut. Hold your Allen key really steady so it can't turn. Okay, that's tight. And check your fence. That's right on 90. There's no light showing anywhere there. And you could just snug a tiny bit more on that tightening screw there, and we're right on it. That's about all that there is to setting up the Laguna JX8 ShearTech 2 jointer. So let me know in the comments if you have any other questions or any other tips for other viewers. And until next time, go build something beautiful.